The first refusal was polite enough to sound almost respectable. That was what made Thomasina Thorneby dislike it. On the afternoon of May 7th, 1858, the first-class waiting room at York Station was crowded beyond comfort, because the London train had been delayed, and respectability had begun to show its harder face. Ladies guarded empty chairs with reticules. Gentlemen spread newspapers across neighboring seats. A child slept beneath a shawl, while 3 grown women discussed the inconvenience of travel. Near the door stood an elderly gentleman whose shoulders had begun to sag beneath fatigue. He was not ill, Thomasina thought. Not yet, but he had the grey, strained look of a man who had been standing too long, and had reached the point where pride alone was keeping him upright. "I beg your pardon," he said to a woman in plum-coloured silk. "Might that seat be free?" The woman glanced at the reticule resting upon it. "I'm expecting someone." The elderly gentleman bowed. Of course, no one came. He crossed the room slowly and addressed a gentleman whose newspaper occupied half his chair and whose walking stick occupied the one beside it. "Forgive me. Would you object if I sat there?" The gentleman did not lower his newspaper. "I would, actually. I need the space." Thomasina looked at the walking stick. It was handsome English oak. It was also less tired than the man asking for a seat. Beside her, Gervase Markham gave a quiet laugh. Poor planning becomes another person's emergency with remarkable speed. Thomasina turned her head. "He appears tired. Then he should have arrived earlier. The train is delayed. All the more reason to secure a place before the crowd does." Gervase's answer came easily, because comfort had rarely failed to wait for him. At 30, he possessed the polished confidence of a man who had been told often enough that self-interest was merely good judgment practiced without embarrassment. Lady Sidonia Markham, seated beside him, adjusted one glove and said, "Do not begin, Thomasina." Thomasina looked at her aunt. "I have not said anything. You have a look. I did not know my face required permission." Sidonia's mouth tightened. She had been beautiful once, and remained impressive enough that few people noticed how quickly her displeasure could cool a room. "We have had a difficult journey already. I will not have you creating unnecessary situations." Thomasina lowered her gaze to the small silver railway ticket case resting in her lap. The initials TT were engraved across its worn surface. Tobias Thornby. Her father had carried it on every journey of her childhood, even after illness had made travel rare. The clasp was old but sound. The silver had scratches from years of use. Thomasina knew every one of them. She had spent the morning arranging everyone else's movement through the world. Tickets, trunks, tea, shawls, the correct porter, the correct compartment, Gervase's missing gloves, which had been in his coat pocket. Lady Sidonia's complaint that the station tea was too weak. Thomasina's left ankle had begun to stiffen from standing, an old discomfort that appeared only after long hours, and was not serious enough to mention. She was 31 years old, and had spent enough time making other people comfortable to understand how quickly usefulness became invisible. Across the room, the elderly gentleman tried again. A mother and daughter occupied 3 chairs between them. One chair held nothing but a folded shawl. "Madam," he said, "might I trouble you for that seat?" The mother glanced at the shawl. "My daughter may need it." The daughter, who appeared perfectly capable of sharing the chair she already occupied with no one, looked away. The elderly man bowed again, naturally. At the far end of the waiting room, a tall gentleman in a dark travelling coat lowered his newspaper by an inch. Thomasina had noticed him. only because he was one of the few men in the room not performing his importance. He had said little. His expression was restrained, almost severe, and his attention seemed to move without haste from one refusal to the next. He was not young, though neither was he old, perhaps 38. His clothes were of excellent quality, but deliberately plain. No ostentatious pin, no bright waistcoat, no servant hovering at his shoulder. He watched the elderly traveller approach a fourth seat. This one was occupied by the walking stick. The owner of the stick finally lowered his newspaper. "You have already asked me once. I hoped perhaps you might have changed your mind. I have not." Thomasina felt something inside her settle. Not anger. Anger was hot and unreliable. This was colder, clearer. The elderly gentleman stood still for a moment. Then he turned away. Lady Sidonia saw Thomasina shift forward. "No." Thomasina looked at her. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me. Do not stand. He needs the chair, and you need not make yourself conspicuous." Thomasina glanced at the man. His hand had tightened slightly around the handle of his cane. "I am already sitting." Sidonia's voice sharpened. "Exactly." Gervase leaned back, amused. For once, Thomasina, accept an advantage before giving it away. Thomasina looked at him. "Is that what a chair is?" "At present, yes." The old gentleman took one slow step toward the door. Thomasina rose. Her ankle protested briefly, then steadied. Lady Sidonia inhaled through her nose. "Thomasina." Thomasina did not answer. She crossed the short distance between them and spoke before the elderly man could begin another request. "You need not ask again, sir. The seat is yours." He stared at her. For a moment, gratitude seemed to make him older rather than younger. "My dear lady, I could not take your place. You can and you will." His mouth twitched. "You are very determined." "Only when someone is too tired to argue effectively." That earned the faintest smile. Thomasina placed the silver ticket case inside her reticule, drew the strings closed, and stepped aside. The elderly gentleman lowered himself into the chair with visible relief. No one applauded. No one needed to. Thomasina preferred it that way. "Thank you," he said quietly. "A seat may seem a small kindness. It seldom feels small to the person left standing." Thomasina answered. Then perhaps it was not so small. Behind her, Gervase muttered something about unnecessary theatrics. The gentleman in the dark travelling coat had risen. He crossed the room without hurry and stopped near the old man. "You need tea," he said. The elderly gentleman looked up, startled, then visibly pleased. "I had thought you might remain hidden all afternoon." "That depended upon whether you intended to collapse before the London train arrived. I have never collapsed in my life." "You once fainted during Virgil. I was 14. You were 27. The old man gave him a wounded look. Thomasina watched the exchange with curiosity. They knew one another well, very well. The stranger turned toward a railway attendant and asked for hot tea, then quietly arranged a more comfortable compartment for the elderly traveller when the delayed train arrived. He did not wave money or title. He simply spoke with the certainty of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The attendant listened. The old gentleman looked toward Thomasina. "Miss Thorneby, Barnaby Hume." He offered his hand. "And this disagreeable creature has known me far too long." Thomasina looked toward the stranger. Before he could answer, Barnaby said, "You're G." The stranger lifted one finger. Barnaby stopped, coughed, and looked suddenly fascinated by the tea tray approaching from across the room. Thomasina noticed. So did Gervase, who had begun watching with narrower eyes. The stranger said only, "Dunsmore, Mr. Dunsmore," Thomasina replied. His gaze rested on her for one quiet moment. Miss Thornby. There was no flirtation in his manner. That would have been easier to dismiss. There was attention. When the train was finally announced, the waiting room emptied in a burst of skirts, newspapers, impatience, and porters calling above the noise. Thomasina helped Lady Sidonia gather her shawl and gloves, then checked the tickets again. Her silver case remained secured inside her reticule. Barnaby was escorted toward the platform, with tea restored to his colour and humour. Thomasina followed Sidonia and Gervase outside. The platform smelled of steam, iron, coal smoke, and damp stone. Sidonia waited until they were a few steps from the others before turning on Thomasina. "You embarrassed me." Thomasina blinked. "By standing, by making a public display of virtue. I gave a tired man my chair." "Precisely. You made everyone else look cruel." "I did not refuse him their chairs." Gervase gave a short laugh. "There it is. The martyr discovers wit." Thomasina felt the old temptation to retreat, to apologize, to make the moment easier for everyone except herself. Then she remembered Barnaby's hand tightening around his cane. "I am not a martyr." Sidonia lowered her voice. "You are a woman without the position to offend people carelessly." "I did not speak to anyone who refused him." "You did not need to. That was the point of the performance." "There was no performance." "Of course there was." A new voice entered the conversation, calm, male, near enough that none of them could pretend not to hear it. "I believe the gentleman had already been refused, often enough for one afternoon." Sidonia turned. Mr. Dunsmore stood a few paces away, Barnaby now safely attended behind him. Gervase's expression changed first. Thomasina saw it. Not recognition exactly, unease. The stranger's gaze moved from Sidonia to Gervase, then finally to Thomasina. She had not asked him to interfere. She did not know who he truly was. She knew only that he had heard every refusal before hers, and unlike everyone else in that room, he had not forgotten a single one. Lady Sidonia recovered first. Years of social discipline returned to her face before surprise could fully expose it. "You misunderstand, sir," she said. "This is a family conversation, Mr." Dunsmore looked at her with the same controlled attention he had given every refusal inside the waiting room. "I heard it perfectly." Gervase stepped forward. "Then you heard something that does not concern a stranger. Cruelty rarely improves because it occurs among relatives." Thomasina felt the words land between them. Sidonia's chin lifted. Gervase's mouth hardened. She should have been grateful for the intervention. Instead, unease moved through her. She had spent years learning how to survive displeasure without causing a greater scene. And this stranger had just stripped away every polite disguise. Sidonia and Gervase preferred. "You need not defend me from my own decision," Thomasina said. Mr. Dunsmore turned toward her. For one instant, she thought she saw approval rather than offense. "No," he said, "but I may object when others punish you for having made it." Gervase gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You speak as though she performed some great moral act. She surrendered a chair to an old dependent." Thomasina saw Mr. Dunsmore become still, not dramatically. Nothing in him appeared dramatic, yet the air changed. A man's fatigue is not less real because another man believes himself too important to notice it. Gervase flushed. Before he could answer, Barnaby Hume emerged from the station doorway with a cup of tea in one hand, and the expression of a man determined to prove that age had not diminished his appetite for argument. "I leave you alone for 3 minutes, Peregrine, and you begin correcting humanity again." Thomasina noticed the use of the Christian name. So did Sidonia. Mr. Dunsmore looked toward Barnaby. You were nearly unable to remain standing. A temporary inconvenience. You asked 4 people for a seat. 5. That does not strengthen your case. Barnaby smiled at Thomasina. The 5th person had better manners. A porter approached to say the train would board shortly. Mr. Dunsmore had already arranged for Barnaby to travel in a more comfortable compartment. But the older man still held his tea and cane while attempting to direct the porter himself. Thomasina stepped forward. Let me carry that. Miss Thornby, you have already surrendered enough furniture on my behalf. It is only tea. Tea has altered the fate of nations. Then I will handle it carefully. Barnaby surrendered the cup. Thomasina glanced at her reticule. She needed both hands for only a moment. Gervase stood nearest. Would you keep this for me? She asked. His annoyance was immediate but restrained. Must I? For several minutes. He held out his hand. Thomasina passed him the reticule, its drawstrings looped over 2 fingers. The silver railway ticket case remained inside. Exactly where she had placed it, in the waiting room. She carried Barnaby's tea the short distance while a porter helped him toward the correct compartment. She did not see Mr. Dunsmore's gaze settle briefly on Gervase's hand. She did not see the way his attention sharpened when Gervase looked down at the reticule before glancing toward Thomasina. Mr. Dunsmore saw only the bag. He did not know what it contained. When Thomasina returned, Gervase handed it back without comment. She tightened the drawstrings and looped them over her wrist. Thank you. An exhausting service. You survived. Barnaby, already near the carriage door, laughed. Mr. Dunsmore did not. A railway clerk approached him with hurried respect. Mr. Dunsmore, your arrangements have been made. Gervase's expression changed. It was slight, but Thomasina saw it. Mr. Dunsmore saw it too. Dunsmore, Gervase repeated. Yes. Have we met? No. The answer came too quickly to be careless. Gervase studied him. You looked at me as though you recognized the name Markham. Mr. Dunsmore's face remained unreadable. I have seen it before. Where? In a context I prefer to understand fully before discussing. Gervase's jaw tightened. How cautious. Facts deserve the effort. The boarding call sounded before Gervase could press further. Passengers moved toward the carriages. Sidonia immediately resumed command, asking Thomasina whether the shawl had been collected, whether the tickets were ready, whether the smaller case had been sent ahead. Thomasina answered each question. Her ankle had stiffened again after standing on the platform, but only mildly. She adjusted her weight and continued. Mr. Dunsmore noticed. He said nothing until Sidonia and Gervase had entered the reserved compartment. Then he looked at Thomasina. There is a seat available in the next carriage. I have one here. Do you? Thomasina looked through the open door. Sidonia occupied one corner. Gervase had spread his coat across the seat opposite. The remaining place was narrow enough to require negotiation. She looked back at Mr. Dunsmore. I am not a charity case. I would not insult you by treating you as one. Then, why are you arranging a seat for me? Because you have spent the last hour arranging comfort for everyone else, and because your ankle is beginning to trouble you. Thomasina stared at him. You notice too much. I have been accused of worse. By Mr. Hume? Frequently. Barnaby called from farther down the platform, and with excellent reason. Thomasina almost smiled. Mr. Dunsmore did not press. The seat is available. Whether you use it is your decision. There it was again. Decision, not permission. She looked toward Sidonia's compartment, then toward the open door of the next carriage. For part of the journey, she said, as you wish. He stepped aside He did not offer his hand as though she were fragile. He did not congratulate himself. Thomasina entered and sat beside the window. Only then did she realize how tired she had become. A few minutes later, Sidonia appeared at the doorway. Thomasina, yes? You are sitting here. For the moment, Sidonia glanced behind her, where Mr. Dunsmore stood speaking with Barnaby. I suppose that is sensible. Thomasina nearly laughed at the speed with which another person's attention could transform disobedience into good judgment. The train pulled away from York beneath steam and smoke. Fields opened beyond the window. For a time, Thomasina sat quietly, her reticule secure on her lap, the silver ticket case still inside. Mr. Dunsmore did not sit beside her. He took a place across the aisle, close enough for conversation, but not close enough to presume it. Barnaby, restored by tea and triumph, talked until the rhythm of the train finally softened him into silence. Later, Gervase passed through the carriage and paused when he saw Mr. Dunsmore looking toward Thomasina. You have a remarkable memory for trivial details, he said. Mr. Dunsmore looked up. Do I? The old man's fatigue, my cousin's ankle, a chair in a waiting room. I remember what appears important. Gervase glanced at Thomasina. My cousin is not important to you. Mr. Dunsmore's expression did not change. Your cousin is a person. That generally qualifies. Thomasina looked out the window before either man could see how deeply the words affected her. London was darkening when the train finally arrived. Gas lamps shone through the station haze. Porters opened doors. Sidonia became brisk again. Gervase remained unusually quiet. Thomasina rose, ankles steady now after hours of rest, and gathered her reticule. Barnaby stepped down with assistance, then turned toward Mr. Dunsmore. You have been intolerably secretive all afternoon. Mr. Dunsmore gave him a warning look. Barnaby ignored it. At my age, one should not be forced to remember unnecessary rules. Then, before Thomasina, Sidonia, and Gervase, he inclined his head with affectionate disrespect and said, Thank you, Your Grace. Silence fell. Thomasina looked at the man in the dark travelling coat. Lady Sidonia went pale. Gervase's face became utterly still. Peregrine Dunsmore met Thomasina's gaze. Miss Thorneby, he said. Barnaby smiled. The 8th Duke of Merewick, he added helpfully. For one heartbeat, no one moved. The noise of the London station continued around them with complete indifference. Porters called. Carriage doors slammed. Steam drifted beneath the iron roof. Yet, Thomasina heard none of it clearly. The man who had sat across the aisle in a dark travelling coat, the man who had noticed Barnaby's fatigue and her ankle and every cruel refusal in York, was not merely Mr. Dunsmore. He was Peregrine Dunsmore, 8th Duke of Merewick. Lady Sidonia recovered first. Rank had always sharpened her instincts. Your Grace, she said, sinking into a curtsy so smooth that only Thomasina would have known how violently surprise had disturbed her. Gervase bowed more stiffly. Thomasina followed a moment later, though she could not help thinking that the man himself had not changed in the space between one breath and the next. Only what everyone knew about him had changed. Peregrine looked at Sidonia, Lady Sidonia, then at Gervase, Mr. Markham. Finally, his gaze returned to Thomasina, Miss Thornby. His manner toward her was exactly what it had been before Barnaby spoke. That steadied her more than she expected. Sidonia smiled with careful warmth. Had I understood earlier, Your Grace, I should naturally have ensured that our conversation at York was not misunderstood. Peregrine's expression remained composed. My identity does not alter what I heard. The words were quiet. Their effect was not. Sidonia's smile thinned. Gervase stepped in. Surely we need not make a drama of a moment's irritation. Travel tries everyone's temper. Barnaby, standing beside a porter with one hand resting on his cane, said, "Strangely, it did not prevent Miss Thornby from offering me her seat." Gervase ignored him. "My cousin has always been impulsively generous." Thomasina looked at him. She had been called many things in Markham House. Impulsively generous was not among them. Peregrine seemed to hear the lie inside the compliment. So I observed. Gervase's eyes narrowed slightly. "You have been remarkably observant, Your Grace." "It is a useful habit." Barnaby cleared his throat, particularly when one has spent 40 years trying to teach it into another person. Thomasina looked toward him. "You taught his Grace?" "Against considerable resistance." Peregrine gave him a cool look. "You assigned Tacitus to a boy of 12, and you survived, barely. A triumph of education." Thomasina smiled before she could stop herself. Peregrine saw it. Something almost warm touched his face, then was gone. Barnaby turned to her. "I was his tutor once. Later, when he discovered I could no longer be dismissed by merely growing taller than I was, he kept me as an advisor." "You were never formally kept," Peregrine said, a painful oversight. "You invited yourself to Merewick for 3 months. You needed supervision. I was 34, exactly. The exchange broke some of the tension, though not all of it. Sidonia had begun to look at Thomasina differently. Not kindly, strategically. Thomasina knew that look. It meant that an ordinary action had acquired social value because a duke had witnessed it. The thought made her uneasy. At York, she had given Barnaby her seat because he was tired. Nothing more. Now, before the night was over, that act could become ambition in the mouths of people who preferred motives more cynical than kindness. Peregrine seemed to notice the change in her expression. "Miss Thornby." She looked at him. "Yes, Your Grace. You appear troubled," Sidonia answered before she could. "Thomasina is merely tired." Peregrine's gaze did not leave Thomasina. "Is that so?" There was the question again, directed to her, not to Sidonia. "I am a little tired," Thomasina said, "but that is not what troubles me." Sidonia became very still. Peregrine waited. Thomasina lowered her voice. "By tomorrow, people may decide I knew who Mr. Hume was, or who you were. They may say a small kindness was calculation." Barnaby's face softened. Peregrine answered without hesitation. "Then they will be wrong. Society is not always troubled by being wrong." "No," his eyes held hers. "But I am." Thomasina felt something shift inside her. Not trust yet. Trust required time, but recognition perhaps. A sense that he understood why false motives frightened her more than praise pleased her. Peregrine continued. "I understood perfectly well that you knew neither who Mr. Hume was, nor who I was when you gave up your seat." Thomasina glanced at Barnaby. "I knew he was tired." "Exactly." Peregrine's voice lowered. "Your manner has not altered. I hope mine need not." The simplicity of the statement made it stronger. Thomasina inclined her head. "I hope not." Gervase made a faint sound of impatience. "We should be going. The carriage will be waiting." At that moment, a liveried messenger approached Peregrine with a sealed note. Peregrine took it, glanced once at the wax, and broke the seal. Thomasina did not watch him at first. She gathered her reticule more securely over her wrist. The silver railway ticket case remained inside, untouched since York. Lady Sidonia adjusted her gloves. Barnaby spoke quietly to the porter. Then Thomasina noticed that Peregrine had stopped reading. His eyes lifted from the paper to Gervase. The look lasted less than a second. It was enough. Gervase saw it too. "Serious news?" he asked. Peregrine folded the note once. "Potentially." "Political?" financial. Jervis's face did not change, but Thomasina saw the muscles beside his mouth tighten. Anything that concerns me, Peregrine studied him. Perhaps. The station seemed suddenly colder. Gervase gave a short laugh. That is an unusual answer. I prefer facts before conclusions. How admirable, I find it practical. Lady Sidonia stepped between them with a social brightness that convinced no one. We are keeping everyone standing. Thomasina, the carriage. Thomasina turned. Peregrine said, "Good evening, Miss Thornby." "Good evening, Your Grace." Barnaby raised his cane slightly. "And thank you again." Thomasina smiled at him. "For the seat, for reminding me that asking 5 times is sometimes worthwhile. I am not sure that is the lesson. At my age, I choose my own lessons." The Markham carriage waited beyond the station entrance. Thomasina climbed in beside Sidonia, while Gervase took the opposite seat. The moment the door closed, silence fell. London lights moved past the windows. Thomasina kept her reticule on her lap. Gervase stared out into the darkness for nearly a minute before saying, "You will not encourage this." Thomasina looked at him. "Encourage what?" "The Duke's attention," Sidonia said sharply. "Gervase." "What?" "We all saw it." Thomasina felt anger rise, but she refused to let it control her voice. His Grace was polite. He was interested in Barnaby's fatigue, in your rudeness, in the fact that no one else would give up a chair. Gervase looked at her. "Do not become clever now. I have always been clever. You have simply preferred me useful." Sidonia inhaled. Gervase's gaze hardened. "You think a duke's notice changes your position?" Thomasina looked down at the reticule in her lap. "No." "Good. But I think it may change yours." He went very still. Thomasina had not meant to say it. The words had come from the memory of his face. When Peregrine opened the sealed note, Sidonia turned toward him. What does she mean? Nothing. His Grace said the matter might concern you. He said perhaps. Thomasina looked at Gervase, and you looked afraid. The carriage seemed to hold its breath. Gervase leaned forward. You would be wise to stop noticing things. Thomasina met his eyes. That sounds like advice from someone who has something to hide. Sidonia snapped. Enough. No one spoke again until they reached Markham House. Thomasina went upstairs soon after, but sleep did not come easily. She thought of Peregrine's words. Your manner has not altered. I hope mine need not. Across London, in the study at Merewick House, Peregrine stood beside the fire, with Barnaby seated opposite, and the sealed note open again in his hand. The Northgate accounts contained several irregular payments. 2 were linked, indirectly but unmistakably, to the name Gervase Markham. Peregrine read the figures twice. Then he remembered York, Gervase laughing while an exhausted man stood. Gervase reacting to the name Dunsmore. Gervase holding Thomasina's reticule for several minutes and looking down at it before returning it. None of those things proved wrongdoing. Peregrine did not mistake dislike for evidence. He also did not ignore patterns merely because they were inconvenient. Barnaby watched him. You are thinking. A dangerous habit. What about? Peregrine folded the note. Mr. Markham. Barnaby's humor faded. And Miss Thornby. Peregrine looked toward the dark window. She does not know enough to be dangerous to him. Barnaby studied him. Yet, Peregrine said nothing. The next morning, shortly after breakfast at Markham House, a servant entered the drawing room carrying a silver tray. Upon it lay a calling card. Lady Sidonia took it first. Her face changed. Thomasina looked up from the correspondence she had been sorting. Sidonia read the engraved name aloud. The Duke of Merewick. Lady Sidonia read the card twice before placing it back on the silver tray as though the engraved words might change if she gave them enough attention. The Duke of Merewick. Thomasina remained seated at the small escritoire, one hand resting on a half-finished household letter. Across the room, Gervase looked up too quickly. He is calling here, apparently. Sidonia glanced toward Thomasina. You will change your dress. Thomasina looked down at the plain grey-blue gown she had chosen for the morning. Why? Because a duke is coming. He saw me yesterday, at a railway station. I was still wearing a dress. Sidonia's expression sharpened. Do not be tiresome. Thomasina set down her pen. The silver railway ticket case remained inside her reticule beside the chair. She had not removed it since returning from York. When is His Grace expected? The card was sent ahead. Shortly after, noon, I should think. That gave Sidonia enough time to rearrange flowers, reject one arrangement, order another, decide the drawing room appeared too dim, complain about the curtains, and send servant searching for a silver salver that had been in the dining room all morning. Thomasina watched the transformation with quiet disbelief. Nothing in Markham House had changed except the possibility of a powerful man seeing it. Gervase remained near the window, unusually silent. The previous evening, Thomasina had accused him of looking afraid when Peregrine received the sealed note. She had expected anger. Instead, Gervase had told her she would be wise to stop noticing things. Now, whenever Sidonia turned away, his gaze moved to the clock. You seem concerned, Thomasina said. About what? The Duke's visit. Gervase gave her a flat look. You have begun imagining yourself important. No, I have begun noticing when you are nervous. There is a difference between nervousness and irritation. You should practice it more convincingly. Sidonia turned. Enough, both of you. At 12 minutes past noon, carriage wheels sounded outside. Sidonia sat straighter. Gervase crossed the room. Thomasina remained where she was until the servant announced, His Grace, the Duke of Merewick. Peregrine entered with the same controlled presence he had carried through the York waiting room, though without the dark travelling coat. He bowed to Sidonia, acknowledged Gervase, and then looked toward Thomasina. It was the first place his attention settled. Miss Thornby. Thomasina rose. Your Grace. Sidonia smiled. What an unexpected pleasure. Thomasina nearly looked at the calling card still resting on the salver. Peregrine did, only for a moment. I hoped the card had arrived. Of course, I only meant that such an honor is never expected. Peregrine accepted the explanation without rescuing it. After the first formalities, he said, Mr. Hume asked me to convey his gratitude to Miss Thorneby. Sidonia answered at once. Thomasina has always been invaluable in small matters. Peregrine turned his head slightly. I have often found the small matters reveal the largest truths. Silence followed. Thomasina saw Sidonia's fingers tighten around the edge of her fan. Gervase entered the conversation before the pause grew dangerous. York was hardly a moral trial, Your Grace. A tired man needed a chair. My cousin gave him one. Yes, Peregrine's tone remained calm. That is what happened. Gervase smiled faintly. Then perhaps there is no need to make more of it. I have not. You arranged, Mr. Hume's compartment. You arranged my cousin's seat. You intervened in a family disagreement. Circumstances occasionally reveal people before they have time to arrange themselves. Gervase's eyes cooled. I prefer preparation. Yes, Peregrine said. I imagine you do. Thomasina looked down before amusement could betray her. Sidonia changed the subject with the skill of a woman, born into rank and trained never to admit that conversation had escaped her control. She had been the younger daughter of a deceased earl, and had never forgotten the social world into which she had first opened her eyes. "You mentioned Mr. Hume's gratitude, Your Grace. I hope he suffered no ill effects from the journey." "None." T restored his conviction that everyone else worries unnecessarily. "Then all is well." "Quite." Peregrine looked toward Thomasina again. "I am holding a small charitable subscription luncheon at Merewick House in 4 days' time. The committee is considering practical support for railway workers and widows left in difficulty after accidents or illness." Thomasina listened more closely. Peregrine continued. "Mr. Hume suggested Miss Thorneby might have useful thoughts." Sidonia smiled. "How kind. We should be delighted to attend." Peregrine looked at Thomasina. "If Miss Thorneby wishes." The room seemed to become very still. Sidonia had already answered. No one ever asked Thomasina after Sidonia had answered. Peregrine waited. "I would be glad to come," Thomasina said. "Good." The word was simple, but something inside her responded to being asked as though it were a form of unexpected freedom. Gervase noticed. "My cousin has little experience of railway administration." "I did not ask her about railway administration." Peregrine turned to Thomasina. "Mr. Hume told me you cared for your father through a long illness." The mention of Tobias tightened something in her chest. "I did." "Then perhaps you understand the difference between sympathy and practical help." Thomasina thought of unpaid bills, arriving while medicines still needed to be purchased, of well-meaning visitors bringing flowers when what her father had needed was someone to carry a message to the physician before dusk. "Sympathy may open a purse," she said, "but practical arrangements decide whether help arrives before rent is due." Peregrine's gaze sharpened with interest. "Exactly." Sidonia gave a small laugh. "Thomasina has always been sensible about domestic matters." Peregrine did not look away from Thomasina. "Usefulness is an interesting word, Lady Sidonia. It is often assigned by the people who benefit most from it." Thomasina felt the room change again. This time Sidonia did not answer immediately. Gervase did. "Your Grace seems unusually interested in my cousin." Thomasina's breath caught. Peregrine's expression remained unreadable. "I asked her a question. You remember her ankle, her seat, her opinions." "I remember what appears important." Gervase smiled without warmth. "Trivial details can become habits." Peregrine looked at him. Who was tired? Who noticed? Who did not? Gervase's smile vanished. Thomasina wished she could disappear and remain exactly where she was at the same time. Peregrine turned back to her. "Does your ankle still trouble you?" "No." "Good." He accepted the answer without turning a minor discomfort into tragedy. That restraint mattered more than Thomasina expected. Sidonia began discussing the luncheon, guests, and committee matters. Peregrine answered politely, but gave little away. After several minutes, he rose. Everyone followed. Sidonia offered graceful thanks. Gervase bowed. Thomasina stood slightly apart. Peregrine paused before leaving. "Miss Thornby, Your Grace, Mr. Hume says he remembers York because you gave him your seat." Thomasina smiled faintly. "Mr. Hume remembers York because he was refused 5 times. 4 before you. He counts differently. Often." Peregrine's expression softened. "I remember it because everyone else spoke to refuse. You were the only person who spoke to make room." Thomasina held his gaze. "I did not know anyone was listening." "I know." He bowed and left. The front door closed. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Sidonia turned toward Thomasina. "You will not imagine more in that than exists." Thomasina looked at her. "I did not say anything. You do not need to. Your face is becoming expressive again." Gervase moved to the window and watched Peregrine's carriage pull away. Sidonia lowered her voice. "Well, what? Do you think he knows?" Gervase did not turn. "About what?" Sidonia asked. Gervase hesitated. Then he said, "The Northgate payments." Thomasina had been reaching for her reticule. Her hand stopped. Neither of them noticed at first. Northgate. The word meant nothing to her. Yet Gervase had spoken it with the same tension he carried whenever Peregrine's attention rested upon him. Sidonia said something too low for Thomasina to hear, Gervase answered sharply. Then he turned and saw Thomasina standing by the chair. His face changed. "How long have you been there?" Thomasina lifted her brows. "Since before His Grace arrived." "You heard us?" "I heard the words, Northgate payments." Gervase crossed the room. Thomasina picked up her reticule. The silver ticket case remained inside. "What does Northgate mean?" she asked. "Nothing that concerns you. Then why are you afraid the Duke knows about it?" Sidonia rose. "Thomasina, leave this alone." Thomasina looked from one to the other. "That is not an answer." Gervase's voice became very quiet. "No, it is advice." Thomasina said nothing. She left the drawing room and crossed the corridor towards the smaller room where she had left a book that morning. She had barely reached it when Gervase followed. He entered behind her and closed the door. Thomasina turned. The click of the lock was small. It was also unmistakable. Gervase looked at her. "You will tell me precisely what the Duke asked you." Gervase did not raise his voice. That made the locked door more unsettling. Thomasina stood, with her reticule looped over one wrist, the silver railway ticket case still inside, and watched her cousin cross the room until he stood between her and the only exit. "You will tell me precisely what the Duke asked you," he said. Thomasina held his gaze. "He asked whether I wished to attend the luncheon. He asked about my father. He asked what practical help means, when sympathy is not enough. Nothing else, nothing else. He did not mention me. No. Northgate? No. Payments? No. Accounts? No." Each question came faster than the last. Thomasina felt something inside her settle. Gervase was not merely irritated. He was afraid. "What is Northgate?" she asked. His expression hardened. "I told you it does not concern you." "Then why? Are you asking whether the Duke mentioned it?" "Because I choose to know what powerful men say about me." "That sounds less like choice than fear." He stepped closer. "Be careful." Thomasina did not retreat. "You locked the door to prevent interruption. You mean witnesses." For 1 second, anger showed plainly in his face. Then it vanished behind control. "You have become very bold since York." "No. I have become tired of being told that asking a question is disobedience." Gervase's gaze dropped to the reticule. "What do you keep in there?" Thomasina's fingers tightened around the drawstrings. "My belongings." "Let me see." "No." "Thomasina." "No." He gave a quiet laugh. "You are making a great deal of a little bag." "Then you have no reason to want it." His eyes narrowed. "Give it to me." Thomasina took 1 step back. The movement was small, but it was deliberate. "No." For the first time, the word seemed to surprise him. Gervase had heard her refuse before, but usually after explanations, usually with apology, usually with an attempt to soften the inconvenience. This time there was nothing around the word. "You forget your position," he said. "I remember it very well." "Do you?" "Yes. I am your cousin, not your child, not your servant, not your property." He looked again at the reticule. "The case, then." Thomasina went still. "What case?" Gervase's expression altered almost imperceptibly. "The silver one." Thomasina said nothing. She had carried the ticket case openly at York. He had seen it there. He had also held the reticule while it was inside. yet the sudden precision of his interest felt wrong. "Why do you want to see it?" she asked. "Curiosity." "You have never shown curiosity about anything of mine before." "Everyone has seen that little silver case. Then seeing it again should not matter." His mouth tightened. "Your father left you sentimentality where he should have left judgment." Thomasina felt the insult land, but she refused to give him the reaction he wanted. "My father left me both." Gervase stepped closer again. A woman without protection cannot afford a reputation for ingratitude. There it was, not a threat exactly. Worse, a social truth sharpened for private use. Thomasina thought of years beneath Sidonia's roof, of every meal, and room remembered whenever obedience was required. She looked directly at Gervase. Gratitude is not the same as surrender. Silence filled the room. Then Thomasina said, "Open the door." Gervase did not move. "Open it. You are becoming dramatic." "No, I am becoming clear." He watched her for several seconds, then turned the key. Thomasina waited until he stepped aside. She crossed the threshold without thanking him. The following afternoon, Lady Sidonia summoned her to the morning room. A folded paper lay on the table beside the tea service. Thomasina recognized the solicitor's hand before Sidonia spoke. "Gervase says you are becoming difficult." Thomasina sat only after Sidonia gestured toward a chair. "Gervase calls resistance difficult. You have no cause for cleverness. Then perhaps he should give me less material." Sidonia's face cooled. "This is serious." She tapped the folded paper. "Your father's settlement." Thomasina's posture changed. "What about it? You turned 32 on June 24th. I am aware of my own birthday. In less than 7 weeks, the capital placed in settlement by your father passes fully into your control." Thomasina knew the terms. Tobias Thornby had not left her a fortune, but he had done what he could. A modest sum, enough to matter, enough to give her choices if managed carefully. "Yes." Sidonia folded her hands. "Gervase has offered to manage it for you. I have refused. You should reconsider." "I have considered. You know nothing of investments." "I know enough to understand the difference between assistance and authority." Sidonia's expression sharpened. "You have lived under my roof since your father died." "Yes, we took you in." "Yes, we gave you a home, protection, respectability." Thomasina looked at her aunt. "And I am grateful." "Then show it." The words came so quickly that they revealed more than Sidonia intended. Thomasina glanced at the paper. "By signing over judgment of my own money to Gervase, by allowing a man with experience to spare you mistakes." "Whose mistakes? Do not twist my meaning." Thomasina thought of the years since her father's death. She had managed household correspondence when Sidonia disliked answering it. She had kept track of invitations, appointments, journeys, physicians, tradesmen, and social obligations. When Sidonia had been ill, Thomasina had sat beside her bed, measured hours, organized remedies, written letters, and kept the household moving while Gervase was elsewhere. None of that was heroism. It was life. But it was not nothing. "Hospitality is not a contract for the surrender of my judgment," Thomasina said. Sidonia stared at her. "You speak as though you have been mistreated." "I speak as though gratitude should not be used as a key to everything I own." "Society is not kind to women who mistake independence for invulnerability. I have never believed myself invulnerable." "Then understand this. A woman without a husband, father, or brother can be destroyed by a whisper, a suggestion, a doubt." Thomasina felt the warning. It was precise because Sidonia knew exactly where to place it. "Is that instruction?" Thomasina asked, "or threat?" "Instruction." Thomasina rose. "Then I have heard it." She left the paper unsigned. Later that day, a note arrived from Barnaby Hume. It was brief, untidy, and far warmer than the stationery suggested. He thanked Thomasina again for York, then added that Peregrine had asked whether she might offer practical thoughts at the charitable luncheon, because someone who had cared for an ailing father understood that sympathy without organization often arrived too late. Thomasina read the sentence twice, not because it praised kindness, because it recognized competence. She folded the note and placed it inside her reticule. The silver ticket case rested beneath it. She drew the case out and ran her thumb once across the initials TT. Still carrying that, Gervaise's voice came from the doorway. Thomasina turned. Yes, let me see it. No. He smiled as though she had made a joke. You are becoming predictable. Then stop asking. He stepped into the room and held out his hand. Thomasina. She did not move. His gaze dropped to the case. It is only silver. Then it cannot interest you very much. He reached toward it. Thomasina stepped back before his fingers touched the metal. No. The word was quieter this time. Stronger. Gervaise's face emptied of expression. Thomasina placed the case back inside her reticule and tightened the drawstrings herself. Over the next 2 days, she continued her ordinary duties. She answered correspondence. She attended to Sidonia's arrangements. Twice, Gervaise raised the matter of financial authority. Twice, Thomasina refused. She avoided being alone with him. On the evening of May 11th, after dinner, Thomasina returned to her bedchamber and stopped. Her reticule lay on the dressing table. The drawstrings were loose. She was certain she had tied them. She crossed the room and emptied the contents onto the table. Handkerchief, coins, Barnaby's note, the silver railway ticket case. Nothing appeared missing. Thomasina lifted the case beneath the candlelight. For one moment, she saw only familiar wear. Then she turned it slightly. Beside the clasp was a fresh scratch. Thin, bright, new. Someone had opened her reticule. Someone had handled the case. And whoever had done it had left behind the smallest possible mark. By the morning of May 12th, Thomasina had examined the fresh scratch beside the clasp of her silver railway ticket case, often enough to know that staring would not turn suspicion into fact. The reticule had been opened. The case had been handled. Nothing had been taken. Those were the only things she knew, so she placed the case back inside the reticule, tightened the drawstrings herself, and went to Merewick House with Lady Sidonia and Gervaise. The charitable subscription luncheon was smaller than Thomasina had expected, and more serious than most London gatherings that claimed benevolence as their purpose. There were committee members, several ladies with influence, 2 gentlemen connected to railway interests, Barnaby Hume and Peregrine, who seemed less concerned with being admired than with preventing the discussion from becoming useless. Thomasina noticed the sapphire brooch at Sidonia's throat before they entered the drawing room. The stone was dark blue, surrounded by small diamonds and secured at the high collar of her aunt's gown. Sidonia touched it with 2 fingers and frowned. The clasp is still troublesome. Gervaise looked at her. The jeweler said it was sound. The jeweler says many things. You asked me to take it to him, and I expected you to choose one who knew his business. Thomasina glanced at Gervaise. You delivered it yourself. He looked at her as though the question were impertinent. Yes. Sidonia adjusted the brooch once more. It was only collected yesterday. A footman announced the gathering before Thomasina could ask anything else. Inside, she expected the familiar arrangement in which Sidonia sat among the important people, and Thomasina took whatever place remained. Instead, when the guests moved toward the long table, a servant drew out a chair for her near the middle. The guests moved toward the long table. A servant, Thomasina, paused. A lady in dark green silk glanced at her and said, "I believe Lady Sidonia's companion is meant farther down." Peregrine had been speaking with one of the railway gentlemen. He turned. "Miss Thornby is here at my invitation." His tone held no rebuke. That made the correction more complete. The lady lowered her eyes. Thomasina sat. She felt Sidonia's disapproval from several places away. But Peregrine did not look toward her again until the discussion began. The first proposals were respectable and nearly useless: an annual dinner for widows, a sewing circle, a printed appeal, a subscription announced in prominent newspapers. Peregrine listened to each without mockery. Then he said, "Miss Thornby." Thomasina looked up. "Your Grace, you said yesterday that sympathy often arrives too late. Suppose a railway worker dies and leaves a widow with rent due before any committee can meet. What would you change?" Several faces turned toward her. Thomasina felt the old instinct to make herself smaller. She ignored it. "I would not wait for the London committee to discover the need from London." One of the gentlemen frowned. "Then how would you prevent fraud?" "By knowing whom to trust locally." She looked at him. One reliable correspondent near each principal line. A clergyman where appropriate. A station official with a good reputation. Perhaps a physician in larger towns. Someone who can verify need quickly and send a written account afterward. "Afterward," the gentleman repeated. "In urgent cases, yes. Hunger does not become more respectable because it waits for paperwork." Barnaby covered his mouth with one hand. Peregrine's eyes warmed slightly. "And the money?" he asked. "A small emergency fund kept separate from larger subscriptions. Enough for rent, coal, food, or immediate travel. Not enough to enrich anyone. Enough to prevent desperation while the committee examines the longer case." The gentleman who had proposed an annual dinner said, "That sounds administratively untidy." Thomasina met his gaze. Need often is. This time even Barnaby did not hide his smile. Peregrine did not praise her. He asked another question. "Who decides what qualifies as urgent?" Thomasina answered. He asked how records should be kept. She answered again. Others began questioning her, not because a duke had told them to be kind, but because the idea was useful. Thomasina felt the difference. She had spent years being called useful, whenever usefulness meant invisible labor. This was not the same. Here, usefulness required a voice. After luncheon, guests moved toward the front hall and terrace. Sidonia was detained by a lady discussing a subscription list. Gervais disappeared into conversation. With a gentleman he seemed eager to impress. Thomasina stepped onto the shallow front stairs. Peregrine came beside her. "The annual dinner gentleman dislikes you. I had noticed. He will survive. You sound very certain." "He has survived being wrong for years." Thomasina looked at him. A smile threatened. Peregrine glanced toward the stone steps. "Do you always leave the most comfortable place to someone else?" She knew at once what he meant. Only when someone needs it more. "That was not my question." Thomasina turned toward him. "Then what was your question?" His expression became quieter. "Whether you know when you are allowed to remain where you are." The words unsettled her more than flirtation would have. She looked away toward the carriages. Allowed by whom? Exactly. Before she could answer, Sidonia called her name. Thomasina inclined her head. "Your Grace, Miss Thornby." The moment ended, but not cleanly. It remained with her, when she returned inside, to collect Sidonia's shawl and fan. The cloakroom held wraps, reticules, gloves, and the small chaos left by respectable people who assumed someone else would remember where everything belonged. Ellen Ward, the young cloakroom maid, moved quickly between shelves. Thomasina set down her own reticule while searching for Sidonia's fan beneath a folded lace wrap. "I had it here," she said. "Perhaps on the lower shelf." "Miss," Ellen bent to look. Thomasina found the fan first, took Sidonia's shawl, and left without realizing she had not picked up her own reticule. A few moments later, Gervais appeared at the cloakroom door. "Miss Thornby asked for her reticule," he said. Ellen hesitated. "She has just gone, sir." "Then I will take it to her." He reached for the bag. She did not say, "Must every kindness require a witness?" His tone remained polite. Ellen released it. Gervais left with Thomasina's reticule in hand. Thomasina, meanwhile, reached the corridor near the front hall and realized what she had forgotten. She turned back. At nearly the same moment, Barnaby emerged from a side passage looking for his hat. Ahead of him, Gervais stood partly concealed near the cloakroom corridor with both hands occupied. Barnaby saw only a glint of silver and the force with which Gervais pressed a small object shut between his thumbs. Gervais heard footsteps, slipped the object away, and moved on. Barnaby thought little of it. He had no reason to know what he had seen. By the time Thomasina returned to the cloakroom, Ellen looked surprised. "Your cousin took your reticule, miss. He said you asked for it." Thomasina stopped. "I did not." Ellen paled. "I am sorry," he said. "It is not your fault." Thomasina found the reticule moments later on a small table near the corridor. The drawstrings were closed. She touched them, remembering the loose cords in her bedchamber the previous night. For 1 second, she considered opening the silver case there. Then Sidonia called again from the front hall, impatient and loud enough to carry. Thomasina took the reticule and went. Before leaving Merewick House, she crossed a smaller passage and heard voices behind a half-open door. Gervais spoke first, too low for her to distinguish the words. Sidonia answered sharply. "You told me she needed one sharp lesson in what life is like without family protection. I will have no public spectacle." Thomasina froze. Gervais replied, but carriage wheels sounded outside and swallowed his answer. She moved closer. The voices stopped. Thomasina stepped away before either could discover her. One sharp lesson. The phrase followed her all the way back to Markham House. She did not know whether it concerned the settlement, Peregrine, Northgate, or something else. That evening, after the party had returned from Merewick House and tea had been brought into the Markham House drawing room, Sidonia lifted one hand to her throat. Her fingers touched bare fabric. She went still. Gervais looked up. Thomasina watched the color leave her aunt's face. "My sapphire brooch," Sidonia said. The room fell silent. Then she looked directly at Thomasina. "It is missing." For several seconds after, Lady Sidonia said the brooch was missing. No one moved. Thomasina stood with her reticule resting against her skirt and felt the entire room become alert in a way it had not been a moment before. 2 ladies from the luncheon committee had accepted Sidonia's invitation to tea after the return from Merewick House, along with an elderly gentleman who had spent most of the afternoon discussing charitable subscriptions. Now all 3 looked toward Sidonia's bare throat. Gervais rose first. "When did you last see it?" Sidonia touched the high collar of her gown. "At Merewick House. I remember adjusting it before luncheon." Thomasina remembered too. The blue stone, the troublesome clasp. Gervais saying he had delivered it to the jeweler. one of the ladies said. Perhaps it came loose in the carriage. Perhaps, Gervase replied. He crossed toward the bell pull. We should search before anyone leaves. Thomasina looked at him. Search what? The carriage, the servants' rooms. Any bags brought back from Merewick House? Why the servants' rooms? Gervase turned. Because a valuable brooch is missing. That is not an answer. Sidonia's expression hardened. Thomasina, this is hardly the moment. It is precisely the moment. A missing object does not make every servant a thief. The elderly gentleman near the fire looked uncomfortable. One of the committee ladies glanced toward her own reticule. Gervase gave Thomasina a faint smile. You seem unusually anxious about a simple search. The accusation was soft enough to sound accidental. Thomasina felt it anyway. I am anxious about suspicion becoming evidence merely because someone says it politely. Sidonia drew herself upright. No one is accusing anyone. Not yet. Gervase pulled the bell. Then perhaps everyone present might spare us further argument by allowing their belongings to be examined. Discreetly. Thomasina stared at him. The same man who had asked repeatedly to see her silver case now proposed searching every reticule in the room. She thought of the loose drawstrings on May 11th, the fresh scratch beside the clasp. The reticule Gervase had taken from the cloakroom that afternoon without her permission. She still did not know what any of it meant. Before she could speak, Sidonia said, Send word to Merewick House. If the brooch was lost there, His Grace should know. A footman was dispatched. The search began with the carriage and nearby rooms. Nothing was found. Then one of the ladies opened her reticule voluntarily. I have nothing to hide. Another followed. The act was contagious. Respectability converted choice into obligation with remarkable speed. Thomasina kept her own reticule closed. Gervase noticed. And yours? No. Sidonia stared at her. Do not be absurd. I do not consent to being searched because your brooch is missing. Gervase stepped closer. That is an unfortunate position to take. Thomasina felt every eye move toward her. Only if you have already decided what refusal means. The front door sounded in the hall before Gervase could answer. Moments later, a servant entered. His Grace, the Duke of Merewick, Mr. Barnaby Hume, Mrs. Bellamy. Peregrine came into the room with Barnaby at his side and the composed housekeeper of Merewick House behind them. His gaze moved first to Sidonia, then to Thomasina, then to the reticule in her hand. He took in the room quickly. Lady Sidonia's message said the brooch may have disappeared at Merewick House. Sidonia nodded. I wore it there. I discovered it missing only after we returned here. Mrs. Bellamy stepped forward. The rooms used for luncheon have been checked, my lady. Nothing was found. Gervase folded his arms. Then it must have left the house with someone. Peregrine looked at him. Perhaps. We were already examining personal belongings. Peregrine's expression became cooler. Were you? Sidonia said, No one wishes for unpleasantness, Your Grace. Then it is fortunate that unpleasantness is not the same thing as truth. Gervase's mouth tightened. Surely there can be no objection to a discreet search if everyone submits equally. Thomasina said, There can be an objection when refusal is treated as guilt. Peregrine looked at her. Do you wish to open your reticule? The question mattered because it was a question. Thomasina looked around the room. If she refused, Gervase would use it. If she agreed, he would call that proof of innocence only if nothing was found. She hated the choice, but it was still hers. Yes, she said. I will open it myself. Peregrine inclined his head. Thomasina untied the drawstrings. Her fingers were steady until she removed the contents one by one. Handkerchief, Coins. Barnaby's note. Then the small silver railway ticket case engraved TT. Gervase leaned forward. Thomasina saw it. Peregrine saw it too. Sidonia said, "Open that." Thomasina closed her fingers around the case. "It belonged to my father. And no one is accusing your father. No." Thomasina looked at Gervase. "Only me." Gervase gave a quiet laugh. "You are making this theatrical. You asked twice to see this case before today." His face changed by almost nothing. "Curiosity is not a crime, nor is refusing you." Sidonia's voice sharpened. "Thomasina, open it." Thomasina looked down. The fresh scratch beside the clasp caught the firelight. She pressed the mechanism. It resisted. Her heartbeat changed. The clasp had never resisted before the scratch appeared. Peregrine stepped nearer. "You need not continue." Thomasina lifted her eyes. "If I stop now, everyone here will decide why. They have no right. That will not prevent them." She pressed harder. The case opened. For one instant, Thomasina did not understand what she was seeing. Blue, a deep flash of sapphire where no sapphire belonged. Then the shape became clear. Lady Sidonia's brooch lay forced inside the narrow silver case, and beneath it, partly obscured but still visible, rested the original railway ticket from York dated May 7th, 1858. The room went utterly silent. Thomasina could hear the fire settle in the grate. Sidonia's face lost color. "Thomasina," she whispered, "how could you?" The words hurt more because they were quiet. Thomasina looked at her. "I did not take it." Gervase exhaled through his nose. "The brooch is in your possession. It is in my case. That is not the same thing. You expect us to believe someone placed it there." Thomasina looked at the scratch beside the clasp. "Someone opened my reticule before today." Gervase gave a humorless smile. "Convenient. I found the drawstrings loose last night. The case had been scratched." "And you told no one, because nothing was missing." Sidonia stared at her as though betrayal had already been proved. Peregrine said, "No one touches the case." His voice was quiet. Every person in the room obeyed. He moved beside Thomasina, not in front of her, and examined the open silver case without placing a hand upon it. "Mrs. Bellamy, a separate box, if you please." The housekeeper produced a small jewelry box she had brought in case the missing brooch was found at Merewick House. Before Barnaby, Mrs. Bellamy, and the others present, the sapphire brooch was carefully removed from Thomasina's silver case and placed inside the separate box. The York railway ticket remained inside the case. Mrs. Bellamy closed the jewelry box and retained it. Sidonia said, "Your Grace, surely the matter is plain." Peregrine turned toward her. "No accusation will be treated as fact merely because a room finds silence convenient." Gervase said, "The brooch was discovered among Miss Thornby's possessions." "Yes." Peregrine's gaze hardened. "That proves where it was found, not how it arrived there." Thomasina looked at him. For one brief moment, relief threatened to weaken her knees. She stopped it. Peregrine turned back to the silver case. "The clasp is marked, I know. When did you first see the scratch?" "Last night." "Before the brooch was declared missing?" "Yes." His gaze sharpened. "Was the mark there at York?" Thomasina thought of her father's case in her hands at the station, familiar as memory. "No." Peregrine was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I would like to keep the case temporarily so its present condition can be examined and preserved. Only with your permission." Thomasina's fingers tightened around the silver. Giving it up felt worse than she expected. It had belonged to Tobias. It was the one thing she had carried through every uncertain year since his death. Peregrine did not reach for it. He waited. "The ticket stays inside," Thomasina said. Yes, and the case is not opened alone. Agreed. She looked toward Barnaby and Mrs. Bellamy. Both had witnessed the brooch being removed and the condition of the case. Thomasina extended her hand. Peregrine accepted the silver case only after she released it. Something inside her hurt at the absence of its familiar weight. She looked at him. The room seemed to recede. There was only one question she cared to ask. "Do you believe I stole it?" Peregrine met her eyes. He hesitated. One beat, perhaps less. It was enough. "I believe the facts must be examined before anyone is condemned." Thomasina felt something close inside her. "That was not what I asked." Thomasina, she turned away before he could finish. Thomasina did not sleep that night. Long after the last guest had departed from Markham House, and the drawing-room fire had been reduced to embers, she lay awake beneath the weight of one question Peregrine had failed to answer. "Do you believe I stole it?" His hesitation had lasted less than a breath. It had still been long enough to wound. By morning, accusation had become negotiation. Lady Sidonia summoned Thomasina to the morning room before breakfast had properly ended. Gervase was already there. A folded document rested beside the tea service, and Thomasina knew before anyone spoke that it concerned her settlement. The silver railway ticket case was not with her. It remained at Merewick House in Peregrine's temporary custody, the original York ticket still inside. The sapphire brooch remained separately secured under Mrs. Bellamy's care. Thomasina carried only her reticule, lighter than usual, without the silver case, and the strange absence of its familiar weight made her feel more exposed than she wished to admit. Sidonia did not invite her to sit. "There is still a way to contain this." Thomasina looked at her. "Contain what?" "The damage." "You mean the accusation." Gervase leaned one hand against the back of a chair. "They are the same thing now." "No," Thomasina said. "They are not." Sidonia's expression hardened. "Do not be tiresome today." Thomasina glanced at the folded document. "Then say plainly what you want." Gervase answered. "You acknowledge that you took the brooch in a moment of distress." Thomasina stared at him. "No. You have not heard the full proposal. I do not need to." Sidonia stepped forward. "You would remain here. There would be no wider complaint, no attempt to involve authorities, no public scandal beyond what has already occurred. We would say you suffered a momentary lapse." Thomasina felt something cold settle inside her. A lapse from what? Reason. "I did not take the brooch. The brooch was found in your case." "Yes." "Then you must understand how this appears." "I understand perfectly. That is why someone put it there." Gervase gave a short laugh. "Still that?" Thomasina turned toward him. "You sound disappointed." His face changed by almost nothing. "I sound practical." Sidonia touched the folded document. "There is one further matter." Thomasina already knew. "The settlement." "Yes." "You want me to sign authority to Gervase." "It would reassure everyone that you are behaving sensibly." Thomasina looked from one to the other. "So I confess to a theft I did not commit, surrender control of my money when I turn 32, and in exchange I may continue living under this roof." "Do not make it sound ugly," Sidonia said. "I am only making it sound exact." Gervase moved away from the chair. "You are in no position to bargain." "Then it is fortunate that I am not bargaining." Sidonia's voice sharpened. "Think carefully. You have no husband, no father, no brother, no independent household. Society is not kind to an unmarried woman under suspicion." Thomasina felt every word because each one was true. That was what made them cruel. Fear would have been easier to dismiss if it had been built entirely from lies. She had no home of her own. No certainty that anyone beyond Barnaby or Peregrine would believe her. No assurance that the women who had watched the brooch emerge from her father's case would ever forget the image. Yet somewhere between the locked door, the scratched clasp, the planted brooch, and Peregrine's one-beat hesitation, another truth had become clearer. Shelter purchased by surrender was not safety. You told me once, Thomasina said, that a woman without protection could be destroyed by a whisper. Sidonia lifted her chin, and I was right. Yes, you were. Thomasina thought of the words overheard behind the half-open door at Merewick House. One sharp lesson. No public spectacle. She still did not know what Sidonia had understood, or what Gervase had promised. But she knew fear had been part of their plan. Now you are asking me to lie, so that you may decide whether I deserve protection. Sidonia's face changed. We are offering mercy. Mercy for what I did not do. Mercy from consequences. Thomasina looked at the document again. Whose consequences? Gervase's mouth tightened. Do not be clever. I have found that people call me clever whenever the plain truth becomes inconvenient. Sidonia drew a breath. Thomasina, we took you in after your father died. I know, we gave you a home. I know, respectability. Yes, then show gratitude. The old command reached toward Thomasina with familiar force. Meals, rooms, years of dependence. Every kindness entered into an invisible account that was never meant to be settled because the debt itself was useful. Thomasina met Sidonia's gaze. I am grateful for every honest kindness I received here. Sidonia's expression softened slightly. Too early. Thomasina continued, but I will not purchase shelter with a lie. Gervase pushed away from the table. And where will you go? The question struck, because Thomasina did not know. She let the uncertainty exist, away from here. Sidonia stared at her. Do not be theatrical. You cannot. Thomasina almost smiled. You have spent years reminding me this is your house. You cannot be surprised when I finally believe you. Gervase stepped closer. The Duke cannot protect you from what people will say. I did not ask him to. He is already making a fool of himself over you. Thomasina stopped. There it was. The next story, ready before the first, had been disproved. Not merely thief, scammer. Woman who had caught a duke's attention and turned it into protection. She looked at Gervase. You should decide which accusation you prefer before repeating both. His face darkened. Thomasina turned to Sidonia. I will be gone within the hour. She packed only what belonged to her. Dresses, letters, her father's papers, Barnaby's note. The reticule that had once held the silver case now felt strangely empty in her hand. She did not allow herself to imagine the case lying somewhere in Peregrine's house. It had not been taken from her. She had given it into his keeping by choice, before witnesses. That mattered. At 11:30, carriage wheels sounded outside. A servant brought Thomasina a card and a brief note from Mrs. Dorcas Hume, Barnaby's widowed sister. You may come as my guest. No explanation is required before tea. Thomasina read it twice. Relief came so suddenly that she had to grip the edge of the table. She had told Gervase she would go away from here before she knew where away might be. Now a carriage waited. Sidonia stood in the entrance hall as Thomasina descended with her small luggage. If you leave now, do not expect to return on your own terms. Thomasina paused. That is precisely why I am leaving. She stepped into the carriage, only after Markham House disappeared. Behind a turn, in the street, did she let herself breathe fully. Dorcas Hume received her without questions. She was a composed widow with intelligent eyes and a dry voice that made pity unnecessary. Tea first, she said. Explanations later, If ever, the tea is dreadful, but the biscuits have done nothing wrong. A laugh escaped Thomasina before she could stop it. The sound startled her. Across London, at Merewick House, Peregrine stood with Barnaby and Mrs. Bellamy before a table covered in dark cloth. The sapphire brooch remained closed inside the separate jewellery box under Mrs. Bellamy's care. Thomasina's silver railway ticket case lay apart from it, exactly as she had entrusted it to Peregrine. Barnaby and Mrs. Bellamy watched while Peregrine examined the clasp. The fresh scratch beside it was clear. So was a slight distortion in the metal. Forced, Barnaby said. Peregrine studied the edge. It appears so. Mrs. Bellamy leaned closer. The clasp has been pressed out of true, Your Grace. Peregrine looked at the damaged silver and heard Thomasina again. Do you believe I stole it? Barnaby watched him. You should have told her. Peregrine did not pretend to misunderstand. Yes, you did believe her. Yes. Then why did you hesitate? Peregrine's jaw tightened. Because I knew Gervase Markham's name before York. Because Northgate was already under scrutiny. Because if I spoke from feeling before I had proof, he could dismiss everything that followed as a duke protecting a woman he favoured. Barnaby's expression remained unsympathetic, a fine explanation. It is not an excuse. Good. A knock sounded. A footman entered with a sealed note. Peregrine opened it. The message was brief. A London jeweller confirmed that Lady Sidonia Markham's sapphire brooch had been brought for repair shortly before the luncheon at Merewick House. The gentleman who delivered it had given his name plainly. Gervase Markham. Peregrine read the line twice. Barnaby saw the change in his face. What is it? Peregrine folded the note. Gervase had the brooch before it disappeared. Before it was found in Thomasina's case. Peregrine's voice became very quiet. Now we begin. Peregrine did not call on Thomasina the following morning until the hour was respectable enough to prevent even the most inventive gossip from improving upon the truth. She noticed the delay. She also resented herself for noticing. Mrs. Dorcas Hume had given her a small guest room overlooking a narrow garden wall, and had asked no questions beyond whether Thomasina preferred tea before or after, washing away the dust of departure. The kindness had been practical, almost brusque, and therefore bearable. Thomasina slept poorly, woke before dawn, and spent breakfast pretending she was not listening for carriage wheels in the street. None came. By 11, she was ashamed of having expected them. By noon, she was angry that she had. The silver railway ticket case remained at Merewick House in Peregrine's custody, the original York ticket still inside. The sapphire brooch remained separately secured under Mrs. Bellamy's care. Thomasina repeated those facts to herself because facts did not shift according to fear. Peregrine had asked for permission before taking the case. He had kept his word. Yet he had also hesitated when she asked whether he believed her. Both truths existed. Neither cancelled the other. Dorcas found her in the drawing-room with a book open upon her lap. You have been staring at that page for 10 minutes. Thomasina looked down. It is a difficult page. It is a table of contents. Thomasina closed the book. Dorcas poured tea. My brother says the Duke is an intelligent man. Barnaby is biased. Naturally, he taught him. Dorcas handed Thomasina a cup. He also says intelligent men often become especially foolish when they mistake caution for wisdom. Thomasina looked at her. Did Barnaby send you to say that? No, I thought of it myself. A carriage stopped outside. Dorcas glanced toward the window. Thomasina's heart reacted before she could prevent it. She disliked that too. You expected someone? Thomasina asked. No, you are a poor liar. I am an excellent liar. I simply do not waste the skill before luncheon. A few moments later, the maid entered with a card. Dorcas read it, then looked at Thomasina. The choice is yours. There was no pressure in the words, no suggestion that rank made refusal impossible. Thomasina looked at the engraved name. I will receive him. Peregrine entered several minutes later. He wore a dark morning coat and carried no visible impatience, though something in his expression suggested he had been choosing his words since before the carriage stopped. Dorcas remained seated near the window with embroidery she clearly had no intention of touching. Peregrine bowed. Miss Thornby, Your Grace, Mrs. Hume. Dorcas inclined her head. I shall be invisible. Peregrine looked at her. You are incapable of it. Good. We understand one another. Thomasina nearly smiled. Peregrine did not sit until invited. When he did, he placed a folded note on the table between them. A London jeweller confirms that Lady Sidonia's sapphire brooch was brought to him for repair shortly before the luncheon at Merewick House. Thomasina looked at the paper, but did not touch it. By Gervase. Yes, that proves he had access to the brooch. Yes, it does not prove he placed it in my case. No, the answer came without embellishment. Thomasina appreciated that more than reassurance. And the case? She asked. Still secured at Merewick House. The brooch remains apart from it. Mrs. Bellamy and Barnaby witnessed the examination. The clasp was damaged, yes, scratched and forced slightly out of true. Thomasina set down her teacup. Do you believe I stole it? This time Peregrine did not hesitate. No, the answer was immediate. Thomasina felt it like a small blow. You knew that before. Yes, then why did you not say it? Peregrine did not look away. Because I knew Gervase Markham's name before York. Thomasina became still. Dorcas's embroidery did not move. Peregrine continued. There is an inquiry into questionable payments connected with a set of accounts under the name Northgate. Gervase's name appeared before I ever met you. Thomasina remembered the locked drawing-room door. Gervase, asking whether Peregrine had mentioned payments, accounts, Northgate, the Northgate payments. Peregrine's gaze sharpened. You knew the phrase. I heard Gervase ask Lady Sidonia whether you knew about them after your morning call. He realized I had heard. Then he followed me into the smaller drawing-room and locked the door. Peregrine went very still. He locked it? Yes. Why did you not tell me? Thomasina looked at him. You had not told me anything either. The rebuke landed cleanly. Peregrine accepted it. Fair. No, she said quietly. Not fair. Merely true. He inclined his head. Then true. Silence held for a moment. Thomasina looked toward the jeweller's note. How long have you been examining Gervase? Not long enough to reach a conclusion. There were irregularities, not proof. And at York? I recognized the name. So you watched him. And me? Peregrine's expression changed. Not defensively, carefully. Thomasina asked. When did I become a woman to you? And when was I merely a useful road toward your answer? Dorcas lowered her eyes to the embroidery. Peregrine remained silent for one breath. Then he said, You became a woman to me before I knew you could lead anywhere. Thomasina said nothing. He continued, I noticed you because everyone else had found a reason to refuse a tired man, and you stood without knowing anyone of importance was watching. Later, I learned Gervase was connected to you. Those parts of my life crossed. I should have told you. Yes, I told myself silence protected the inquiry. Perhaps it did. It did not protect you. Thomasina held his gaze. Protection without truth can become control. Yes. The answer came so quickly that she almost frowned. You agree? I do now. That was convenient. No, it was unpleasant. Dorcas murmured. Progress usually is. Peregrine ignored her. Thomasina almost did not. A brief smile threatened, then disappeared. What happens now? She asked. I continue examining the evidence. And I wait? Not unless you choose to. Meaning? Peregrine leaned slightly forward. Tell me what you need. Thomasina had expected a plan. Men like Peregrine always had plans. She had not expected a question. No proposal made from pity, she said. His expression tightened. I would never. Let me finish. He stopped. No rescue disguised as romance. No declaration intended to repair my reputation. Not while my name remains under suspicion. Peregrine absorbed every word. Agreed. And if your inquiry touches my life, you tell me. Agreed. You do not decide I am safer without knowing. Agreed. Thomasina studied him. You are accepting this very easily. No, I am accepting it quickly. Those are different things. That sounded like him. She looked toward the window. You wanted to protect me. Yes. Then next time, let me know what danger I am standing in. Peregrine's voice lowered. I will. Silence followed. It was not comfortable. It was better than comfort purchased through concealment. Dorcas finally lifted the embroidery. Well, this is less dreadful than I expected. Thomasina gave her a look. Dorcas shrugged. I have had worse afternoons. Peregrine rose. I should go. Thomasina stood as well. At the door, he paused. Miss Thornby, Your Grace, I am sorry. She knew what he meant. For the hesitation, for believing caution excused silence. Thomasina did not forgive him aloud. She was not ready, but she believed the apology. Good afternoon, Your Grace. He bowed. The carriage had barely disappeared when Thomasina returned to the drawing room and stood very still. A memory had shifted into place. York Station, Barnaby's tea, her own reticule in Gervaise's hand. She saw it clearly now, not because Peregrine had told her, because she had finally understood why the exchange mattered. At York, she said. Dorcas looked up. What about York? Thomasina turned toward the door through which Peregrine had just left. Gervaise had my reticule. The words had scarcely left her mouth when the maid reappeared. His Grace has not yet departed, miss. The carriage was delayed by another vehicle in the street. Thomasina did not hesitate. Ask him to return. Peregrine came back moments later, surprise controlled but visible. Thomasina faced him. At York Station, Gervaise had my reticule while I carried Mr. Hume's tea. Peregrine's eyes sharpened. I saw him holding it. Thomasina stopped. Then you knew? I knew he had the bag. I did not know what you carried inside. Thomasina's breath caught. The silver case was there. Peregrine became very still. You are certain? Yes. I had placed it inside before I gave up my seat. It stayed there until London. Peregrine looked toward the window, thinking. Then York gave him access to the case. Access, Thomasina said. Not proof. His gaze returned to hers. No, and not the moment the brooch was planted. Why? Thomasina's mind was already moving ahead. Because Lady Sidonia still wore the brooch after York. Peregrine said nothing. Thomasina felt the first clean line of the mystery reveal itself. Gervaise may have learned what I carried at York, she said. But he must have needed another opportunity later. The next morning, May 15th, Thomasina sat at Mrs. Dorcas Hume's drawing-room table with 3 things before her and 1 thing deliberately absent. Before her lay a blank sheet of paper, the jeweller's note confirming that Gervaise had delivered Lady Sidonia's sapphire brooch for repair, and her own memory of York. The silver railway ticket case was not there. It remained secured at Merewick House in Peregrine's custody, the original York ticket still inside. The sapphire brooch remained separately under Mrs. Bellamy's care. Thomasina found the absence useful. Without the object before her, she could not be distracted by anger at seeing her father's initials beside the scratch someone else had made. She had to think. Peregrine sat across from her. Barnaby occupied the chair nearest the window, and Dorcas remained with them, though she had announced that she would contribute only when everyone else became intolerably foolish. "Begin with York," Peregrine said. Thomasina looked at him. "No, begin with what York cannot be." He inclined his head. "Very well." She placed one hand flat upon the blank paper. "At York, Gervase held my reticule. You saw him?" "Yes." "I know the silver case was inside." "Yes." "But Lady Sidonia still had the sapphire brooch after we reached London." Barnaby leaned forward. Thomasina continued. "She wore it publicly. I saw it. Others saw it. She complained about the clasp and later sent it for repair." Peregrine's gaze sharpened. "Then the brooch could not have been placed in your case at York." "Exactly." Thomasina picked up the jeweller's note, and this confirms Gervase handled the brooch after York. Barnaby tapped one finger against the arm of his chair. "So York gave him knowledge." Thomasina looked at him. "Perhaps not proof that he opened the reticule, not proof that he examined the case. But if he did, York was when he could have learned what I carried and where I kept it," Peregrine said, "and possibly how the clasp opened." "Possibly." Thomasina did not allow the word to grow larger than it deserved, but the brooch required a later opportunity. Silence settled. Dorcas looked at Peregrine. This is the moment when a duke normally says something impressive. Peregrine ignored her. "Merewick House," Thomasina nodded. "The luncheon." She remembered the cloakroom, Sidonia's shawl, the missing fan, her own reticule left behind, the discovery that Gervase had taken it without her permission. "Ellen Ward told me at the time that Gervase had carried away my reticule." Peregrine's eyes fixed on her. "She told you that then?" "Yes. I found the bag later on a table near the corridor. The drawstrings were closed, so I thought only that Gervase had been presumptuous." "Did Ellen say why she gave it to him?" "He claimed I had asked him to fetch it." Barnaby's expression changed. "You had not?" "No." Peregrine rose at once, then stopped himself. Thomasina noticed. Once, he might have made the next decision alone. Instead, he asked, "Do you want Ellen questioned formally?" Thomasina appreciated the question. "Yes, but do not tell her what answer would help us. Ask only what she remembers." "Agreed." Peregrine wrote a brief note to Mrs. Bellamy requesting that Ellen be asked, in the presence of another senior servant, to give her own account of what happened in the cloakroom on May 12th. He did not mention planting, innocence, or Gervase's possible guilt. The message was sent. Then they waited. Thomasina disliked waiting because imagination worked faster than evidence. Barnaby disliked it because he preferred conversation. Dorcas disliked it because Barnaby preferred conversation. "If you tell the Virgil story again," she warned him, "I shall leave my own house." Barnaby looked offended. "It is educational. It is repetitive." Peregrine said nothing. Thomasina looked at the blank paper again. "There is another thing." Peregrine's attention returned to her immediately. "The scratch. You noticed it on May 11th. "Yes, before the luncheon, before Sidonia declared the brooch missing. And your reticule had been opened. The drawstrings were loose." Barnaby frowned. "So someone may have tried the case before the brooch was planted." "May have," Thomasina said, "or merely handled it. We do not know who opened the reticule." Peregrine looked at her with something close to admiration. She almost resented it. She did not want praise for refusing certainty. She wanted truth. The reply from Merewick House came shortly after noon. Mrs. Bellamy's account was concise. Ellen Ward remembered 2 separate approaches by Gervase on the day of the luncheon. The first time, Thomasina had already taken her reticule. The second time, after Thomasina returned, and briefly left it again while searching for Sidonia's fan. Gervase took the bag, claiming he would carry it to his cousin. Ellen did not see him give it to Thomasina. Thomasina read the account twice. Then he had the second opportunity. Yes, opportunity, Thomasina corrected, not proof. Barnaby gave her a look. You are determined to make this difficult. The truth usually is. Barnaby leaned back, then became still. Something moved across his face. Not certainty, memory. Thomasina waited. Peregrine did too. I went back for my hat, Barnaby said slowly. After luncheon. Thomasina's heartbeat changed. At Merewick House, yes, I took the side passage near the cloakroom. He frowned. Gervase was there. Peregrine did not speak. Barnaby continued. He had something small in his hands. Silver, I think. I saw only the glint and the way he pressed it shut between both thumbs. Thomasina looked at him. My case? I cannot swear it. Barnaby shook his head. At the time, I had no reason to notice more. I did not know your case well enough to identify it from a glimpse. That makes the memory more useful, not less, Thomasina said, because you are not pretending to know what you did not know. Barnaby gave her a faint smile. You are an inconveniently fair woman. I have been accused of worse. Peregrine's mouth almost moved, then a knock interrupted them. Dorcas's maid entered, carrying a letter. For Miss Thornby. Thomasina knew Lady Sidonia's hand at once. She broke the seal and read. The letter contained no greeting beyond her name. Sidonia instructed her to withdraw any suspicion against Gervase, cease cooperating with Peregrine's inquiry, return to Markham House, and sign the prepared financial authority. If she obeyed, Sidonia promised there would be no further scandal. Thomasina read the letter again. Then she handed it to Peregrine. His face became still. This is coercion. Yes, and fear, perhaps. Do you think she knew about the brooch? Thomasina took the letter back. The letter does not prove that. Peregrine nodded. No, that mattered. He did not force the paper to say what he wanted. Thomasina folded it carefully, placed it inside her writing case, closed the lid, and locked it. It stays there until I decide otherwise. Good, Dorcas said. People underestimate locked drawers. They are often more reliable than relatives. Thomasina almost smiled. Then she looked at the blank paper before her. York. Gervase holding the reticule, the silver case inside. Sidonia wearing the brooch afterward. Gervase delivering the brooch for repair. Merewick House. Second access. Barnaby seeing silver in his hands. The scratch, the letter, none of it alone proved the whole truth. Together it formed a shape no longer easy to dismiss. Peregrine asked, What do you want to do? Thomasina looked at him. Not what should be done, not what he intended. What did she want? She thought of the Markham House drawing room, the brooch inside her father's case. Sidonia's quiet voice asking how she could have done such a thing. The witnesses who had gone away carrying the image, perhaps repeating it before anyone bothered to ask how the brooch had arrived there. The accusation began at Markham House, Thomasina said, but the rumor did not end there. Peregrine was silent. Thomasina continued, I want the people who saw me accused, and the people who carried that accusation beyond the room, to hear the truth. Barnaby looked toward Peregrine. Peregrine asked, At Merewick House? Thomasina nodded. The committee met there. Ellen served there. Mr. Hume saw what he saw there. The people who attended the luncheon can be gathered without turning this into a public spectacle. Her voice steadied, and no one will be able to lock the door behind me. Peregrine's expression changed. He remembered. She saw that he did. "What would you have me do?" he asked. Thomasina held his gaze. "Stand beside me. Do not stand in front of me." There was no hesitation. "I will." On the morning of May 21st, Thomasina unlocked the writing case in Mrs. Dorcas Hume's guest room and removed Lady Sidonia's letter with hands that were steady because she had already made the difficult decision days before. The paper was still folded along the same lines. The ink had not changed, neither had its meaning. Withdraw suspicion from Gervase. Cease cooperating with the Duke. Return to Markham House. Sign the financial authority. In exchange, there would be no further scandal. Thomasina read it once more, not because she doubted the words, but because she wanted no one later to tell her she had misunderstood them. Then she placed the letter inside her reticule and closed the drawstrings. Dorcas waited downstairs with Barnaby. Neither asked whether she was frightened. Thomasina appreciated that. Fear did not become smaller because other people named it for her. "You may still decide not to go," Dorcas said when Thomasina entered the morning room. "I know. That is the useful part of choice." Barnaby looked at Thomasina over the top of his spectacles. "And what have you chosen?" "To go." He nodded. "Good." Dorcas gave him a look. "You were supposed to avoid influencing her." "I am old. Influence escapes me accidentally." Thomasina almost smiled. The carriage was announced. During the drive to Merewick House, London seemed offensively ordinary. Shops opened. Servants hurried across streets. Wheels struck stone. No one outside the carriage knew Thomasina was carrying a letter that might destroy what remained of Lady Sidonia's respectable defense. No one knew that in a few hours, people who had seen a brooch emerge from her father's silver case would be asked to decide whether they had mistaken shock for truth. The thought should have made her feel powerful. It did not. It made her feel awake. Peregrine was waiting when they arrived. He stood in the entrance hall, not at the head of a receiving line, but alone enough that Thomasina understood he had come down before the others assembled. His gaze went first to her face, then to the reticule in her hand. "Miss Thornby, Your Grace." Dorcas and Barnaby entered behind her. Peregrine bowed to them, then led the three into a smaller reception room near the main drawing room. Mrs. Bellamy was already there. No one else had been admitted. Thomasina opened her reticule and took out Sidonia's letter. "I brought it myself." Peregrine did not reach for it. "You wish it used today?" "Yes." "Then I will keep it only until the gathering ends." Thomasina extended the letter. He accepted it directly from her. Dorcas and Barnaby both saw the transfer. Peregrine placed the letter beside the jeweller's note on a table, then turned toward Mrs. Bellamy. The housekeeper stepped forward carrying a folded square of dark cloth. Thomasina's breath changed before she could stop it. She knew what lay inside. Mrs. Bellamy unfolded the cloth. The silver railway ticket case appeared, its worn surface familiar, the initials TT still visible, the fresh scratch beside the clasp unmistakable. Thomasina had missed the weight of it more than she had allowed herself to admit. Peregrine did not pick it up at once. "The case has remained secured here since you entrusted it to me," he said. "Mr. Hume and Mrs. Bellamy witnessed its condition then. They witness its return now." Thomasina looked at him. "And the ticket?" "Still inside. The brooch. Still separate under Mrs. Bellamy's care." Only then did Peregrine lift the case and hold it toward her. Thomasina reached out. His hand released the silver, only when hers had fully closed around it. The clasp felt slightly uneven beneath her thumb. The scratch remained. Nothing about its damage had been softened for her comfort. That mattered, Peregrine said quietly. You need not do this. Thomasina looked toward the closed doors, beyond which voices had begun to gather. I know. If you choose to leave, no one here will think less of you. I would. He stilled. Thomasina met his eyes. That is why I am staying. Something changed in his expression. Pride, perhaps, or respect made more difficult by love. He stepped aside, not ahead, beside. The drawing room held only those whose presence could be justified. Lady Sidonia sat rigidly on a pale settee. Gervase stood near the mantel. Barnaby took a chair near the windows. Dorcas sat within Thomasina's sight. Ellen Ward remained near Mrs. Bellamy. Several members of the charitable committee and the guests who had been present at Markham House when the brooch was found had also come. Conversation died when Thomasina entered. She felt the old silence again. The brooch, her father's case, Sidonia's quiet accusation. But this room was not Markham House, and that difference mattered. Here, Thomasina had come by choice. Peregrine addressed the gathering. Miss Thornby was accused at Markham House after the luncheon held here on May 12th. Several of you witnessed what followed. Others heard the accusation before anyone examined how Lady Sidonia's brooch entered Miss Thornby's silver case. Gervase smiled faintly. And now we are to examine it under the direction of a man whose personal interest in Miss Thornby is hardly secret. Peregrine looked at him. You may challenge facts. You may not replace them with gossip. Facts gathered by your household. Gervase glanced toward Ellen. Your servant, your housekeeper, your former tutor. Barnaby answered before Peregrine could. I was his tutor. I assure you, that relationship has rarely made me obedient. No one laughed. Gervase turned to Ellen, and the maid depends upon Merewick House for her position. Thomasina spoke before Peregrine did. Then judge her by the accuracy of what she remembers, not by the height of the chair from which you look down upon her. Gervase's eyes moved to Thomasina. You have acquired confidence. No, I have stopped confusing silence with goodness. Sidonia rose. The movement was measured, but Thomasina knew her well enough to see fury in the control. This is what gratitude has become. Thomasina felt the words before she understood them. Sidonia continued. We took her in after her father died. We fed her, we housed her, we gave her respectability. And now she allows a duke to drag private family matters before strangers. Thomasina looked at her aunt. The old debt presented itself again, fully dressed in kindness. I am grateful for every honest kindness I received, she said. I will not call coercion kindness, merely because both were offered under the same roof. Sidonia's face tightened. You were never coerced. Thomasina looked toward the table where Peregrine had placed the letter. I was told I could return to Markham House if I withdrew suspicion from Gervase, stopped cooperating with his grace, and signed authority over my settlement. A murmur moved through the room. Gervase stepped forward. A private family proposal made under difficult circumstances. A lie in exchange for shelter. Your word against ours. Thomasina did not move. Peregrine placed Sidonia's intact letter upon the table between them. This was delivered to Miss Thornby in Lady Sidonia's own hand, and brought here today by Miss Thornby herself. Sidonia looked at the letter, but did not deny it. Gervase said, Words can be misread. Then read them aloud, Dorcas said. Sidonia's face flashed with anger. That will not be necessary. Thomasina watched Gervase. He had recovered his composure, too completely. Perhaps, he said, We should begin with the supposed evidence. A scratched case, a servant's uncertain memory, an old gentleman's impression of silver in a corridor, a jeweler who says I delivered my mother's own brooch for repair, which I do not deny. He spread his hands. None of that proves Miss Thornby did not take it. Thomasina looked at him. Nor does the brooch being found in my case prove I did. It was in your possession. The case was. And perhaps you asked me to repair the brooch for you. The room went still. Thomasina stared at him. Why would I ask you to repair Lady Sidonia's brooch? Gervase shrugged. Who can say? Perhaps you had already taken it. Perhaps you were nervous. Perhaps you wished to involve me before building this elaborate defense. Peregrine's expression hardened, but he remained silent. He had promised not to stand in front of her. Thomasina felt the silver case in her hand. Gervase continued, encouraged by the room's silence. Memory is unreliable. People remember what powerful men suggest they should remember. A date here, a glance there. A servant prompted by loyalty, an elderly man eager to support his former pupil. Barnaby's face cooled. Careful, Gervase smiled. You see, loyalty. Thomasina lowered her eyes to the case. The clasp resisted slightly when she pressed it. She opened it herself. Inside lay one worn rectangle of card. The original railway ticket from York, May 7th, 1858. Thomasina lifted it between two fingers. Peregrine's gaze sharpened. Barnaby leaned forward. Gervase stopped, smiling. Thomasina looked at him. Then perhaps, she said quietly, we should begin with a date no one needs to remember. Thomasina held the railway ticket between two fingers, and for the first time since the gathering began. Gervase looked uncertain. The date printed upon the worn card required no memory, no loyalty, and no interpretation. May 7th, 1858. That was the day we travelled from York, Thomasina said. It was also the day Gervase held my reticule while I carried Mr. Hume's tea. Gervase recovered quickly. Then you have proved my point. I could have placed the brooch in your case at York, assuming I had any reason to do so. No, Thomasina said. His smile faded. She continued. Lady Sidonia still possessed the brooch after we reached London. She wore it publicly. I saw it. Others saw it. She complained that the clasp was unreliable and sent it for repair. One of the committee ladies shifted in her chair. I remember the brooch at an afternoon call. Sidonia turned toward her, but the woman did not withdraw the statement. Peregrine placed the jeweller's note upon the table. The brooch was delivered for repair by Mr. Gervase Markham. Gervase looked at him. At my mother's request. That may be so, Peregrine said. The note proves only that you had access to the brooch after York. Thomasina glanced at him. He did not stretch evidence merely because it favoured her. That mattered. She lowered the ticket slightly. So the brooch was not placed in my case at York. But York gave Gervase the opportunity to learn what I carried and where I kept it. Gervase gave a dismissive laugh. Opportunity, a useful word when proof is absent. Then let us speak of another opportunity. Thomasina turned toward Ellen Ward. The young woman stood beside Mrs. Bellamy, pale but composed. Thomasina did not answer for her. Peregrine said, Miss Ward, tell those present what happened at the cloakroom on May 12th. Ellen swallowed. Mr. Markham came twice, Your Grace. The first time, Miss Thornby had already taken her reticule. The second time, she had returned to look for Lady Sidonia's fan and left the reticule with me briefly. Mr. Markham took it. He said Miss Thornby had asked him to carry it to her. Gervase folded his arms. And did you see me open it? No, sir. Did you see me place anything inside it? No. Did you see me damage a silver case? No. Ellen's face colored, but she did not look away. I saw you take the reticule when Miss Thornby hadn't asked you to. Gervase smiled coldly, a servant's interpretation. Thomasina said, "Her position does not make her eyes less reliable." Gervase turned toward her, "And your desperation does not make every ordinary act a conspiracy." Barnaby rose slowly from his chair. "I also saw something ordinary that afternoon." Gervase's expression changed. Barnaby continued. "I went back for my hat. Near the cloakroom passage, I saw you holding a small silver object in both hands. You were forcing it shut with your thumbs. You cannot identify the object." "No," Barnaby said. "I could not identify it then, and I will not pretend otherwise now." Thomasina lifted her silver case. The scratch beside the clasp caught the light. "On the evening before the luncheon, I found my reticule open in my bedchamber. Nothing appeared missing, but this scratch was new. After the brooch was found, His Grace examined the case before witnesses. The clasp had been forced slightly out of true. Gervase's composure held, but only just. And again, none of that proves who touched it. "No," Thomasina said. "Not alone." Peregrine looked directly at him. "Taken together, these facts show who had the brooch, who had Miss Thornby's reticule, and when both could have met." Gervase's face tightened. "Taken together by you, a man who is plainly infatuated with her." Peregrine did not answer the insult. Thomasina did. "Then explain Lady Sidonia's letter." Silence fell. Peregrine unfolded. The letter Thomasina had brought from Dorcas's house and placed it beside the jeweller's note. Lady Sidonia demanded that Miss Thornby withdraw suspicion from Gervase, cease cooperating with me, return to Markham House, and sign authority over her settlement. In exchange, there would be no further scandal. Sidonia rose. "That letter was intended to protect my family." Thomasina looked at her. "From what?" Sidonia's lips parted. "From disgrace." "Whose disgrace?" "Do not speak to me in that tone." Thomasina remained calm. "I am asking a question." Gervase moved away from the mantel. "This is absurd. My mother wished to contain a scandal. Any sensible woman would. A scandal created by a brooch found in my case," Thomasina said. "After you had possessed the brooch, taken my reticule without permission, and been seen handling a silver object near the cloakroom. Circumstance, yes, not proof, not one piece alone." Gervase turned toward Peregrine. "You have wanted this conclusion from the beginning. You recognized my name at York. You have been examining Northgate accounts for weeks, have you not?" Several people looked at Peregrine, he answered evenly. "Yes." Gervase laughed without humor. "There, at last, the truth. This has never been about a brooch. It is about your determination to ruin me." "No," Peregrine said. "The Northgate accounts gave you motive. Your own actions supplied the rest." Gervase's expression sharpened. "You have no proof of wrongdoing in Northgate. Not yet, which is why the inquiry continues." Peregrine's voice remained measured. "Unlike you, I do not confuse suspicion with guilt." The rebuke landed. Gervase turned abruptly toward Sidonia. "Say something useful." Sidonia stared at him. "Do not speak to me in that manner." You wanted her frightened. Every face in the room shifted toward Sidonia. Her composure cracked, only slightly. "Enough." "You told me," she said, "that she needed one sharp lesson in what life would be without family protection." Thomasina felt the half-open door at Merewick House return in memory, the exact words, the exact coldness. Sidonia continued, "You said you would frighten her into reason. You told me there would be no public spectacle." Gervase's face changed. "And you agreed she had to sign the authority. I agreed she had become impossible. You wanted control of the money as much as I did. Sidonia recoiled. I wanted stability. You wanted obedience. And what did you want? She snapped. The Northgate inquiry had begun tightening around you before York. You needed money. The room went silent. Gervase stared at her. Sidonia realized too late what she had admitted. Peregrine did not move. Neither did Thomasina. Gervase said quietly, You knew she had to be forced to sign. Not like this. You knew about the lesson. I thought you would frighten her. I thought she would yield privately before any scandal spread. Thomasina felt no satisfaction, only clarity. Sidonia had not placed the brooch in the case, but she had approved fear as a method and expected Thomasina to submit before anyone saw the mechanism. Gervase looked around the room and understood that respectable silence was no longer protecting him. You cannot prove I placed the brooch in that case. Thomasina looked at him. Perhaps no single witness saw your hand do it. But you knew the case. You had access to it twice. You had the brooch. You took my reticule under a false pretext. You were seen forcing shut a silver object. The case was damaged, and when the brooch was found, you tried to make me surrender my settlement before the truth could be examined. Gervase opened his mouth. Thomasina continued. You counted on shame being faster than evidence. That silenced him. One of the gentlemen from the committee who had previously dealt with Gervase in private business rose. Until the Northgate accounts clarified, I will have no further dealings with Mr. Markham. Another gentleman said, Nor will I. Peregrine added only, No introduction under my influence will be available to Mr. Markham while these questions remain unanswered. He did not threaten arrest. He did not pretend a dukedom was a court of law. He simply withdrew trust where trust had been abused. Sidonia sat down slowly. No one rushed to comfort her. Thomasina felt the worn railway ticket still between her fingers. She placed it back inside the silver case and closed the clasp. Then she looked at her aunt. I gave years of my life believing gratitude required silence. It does not. Sidonia's face hardened, but there was no answer left that had not already been exposed. Peregrine turned to the room. Miss Thornby was accused before witnesses. Therefore, the correction will not be private. Anyone who repeated the accusation will correct it with equal diligence. No one applauded. A woman lowered her eyes. Another murmured, Miss Thornby, I am sorry. Thomasina looked at her. Correct the lie. That will be enough. Then Peregrine did something Thomasina had not expected. He turned toward her, but spoke loudly enough for every person present to hear. I should have spoken more plainly when Miss Thornby first asked whether I believed her. My caution protected an inquiry and wounded the woman who had done nothing wrong. That failure is mine. Thomasina felt the words more deeply than any defense he had offered. He did not excuse himself. He did not make his mistake noble. He named it. The gathering ended without triumph. Gervase left first, carrying the knowledge that people who had once welcomed him would now ask questions before opening doors. Sidonia followed later, rigid with injured pride. Ellen departed with Mrs. Bellamy. Barnaby and Dorcas withdrew discreetly. Before Thomasina left Merewick House, Peregrine returned Sidonia's threatening letter directly to her. Thomasina placed it inside her reticule. The sapphire brooch remained separately secured under Mrs. Bellamy's care. The jeweller's note remained among Peregrine's papers. Thomasina held the silver case in her own hand, the York ticket once again inside. At last, the room emptied. Peregrine remained several paces away. You were right, he said. About what? Protection without truth can become control. Thomasina looked at him. And you were right about something too. What? I do not always have to give away the comfortable place. Something softened in his face. Then he said, very quietly, I love you. Thomasina did not move. Peregrine continued, but I will not turn your vindication into a debt you owe me. Her throat tightened. You are not asking me for an answer. No. Why? Because today was about restoring what was taken from you, not taking something for myself. For a long moment, neither spoke. Thomasina closed her fingers around the repaired truth of the silver case. Though the clasp was still damaged and the scratches remained, do you remember what you asked me about always giving up the comfortable place? Yes. She held his gaze. I think I finally understand my answer. 6 weeks after the gathering at Merewick House, Thomasina woke one morning and realized that no one had summoned her. The discovery should not have mattered. For years, mornings had begun with someone else's need. A letter to answer, a carriage to arrange, a shawl misplaced, a caller forgotten, a complaint from Lady Sidonia, a command from Gervase. At Mrs. Dorcas Hume's house, the breakfast bell merely announced breakfast. It did not demand obedience. By early July, that quiet difference had become familiar enough to stop frightening her. Other changes had followed. On June 24th, Thomasina had turned 32, and the modest capital placed in settlement by Tobias Thornby passed fully into her independent control exactly as he had intended. There was no great inheritance, no sudden estate, no miraculous transformation into a woman's society, considered valuable because money had finally made her so. There was simply enough to live respectably, enough to choose where she stayed, enough to refuse any offer of protection that required surrender in return, enough to know that marriage, if it came, would not be a refuge from destitution, but a decision freely made. Gervase's world narrowed in quieter ways. A gentleman who had once discussed private business with him withdrew from future dealings. One creditor, made uneasy by questions surrounding the Northgate accounts, pressed for payment sooner than Gervase had expected. Invitations disappeared. Introductions failed to arrive. Peregrine did not pretend that being a duke gave him the right to imprison a man by command or pronounce legal guilt where no court had done so. He simply refused to lend his name, influence, or confidence to someone he no longer trusted. Others made their own judgments. Lady Sidonia withdrew from London society for the remainder of the season. She sent no apology. Thomasina did not invent one for her. The same threatening letter used at Merewick House remained locked inside Thomasina's writing case. She had read it once more after Peregrine returned it. The words had not softened, withdraw suspicion, cease cooperating with the Duke, return to Markham House, sign away financial authority. In exchange, silence. Thomasina folded the letter and put it away. Some wounds closed without forgiveness. Some truths required no final conversation. The silver railway ticket case remained with her. Several weeks after the inquiry, she carried it to a skilled silversmith and placed it upon his workbench. He examined the distorted clasp, the fresh scratch beside it, and the older marks worn into the silver over years of use. "I can polish these out, miss," he said. Thomasina ran one finger over the initials TT. "No?" He looked up. "No? Mend what must work, leave the rest." He nodded. When the case was returned, the clasp closed properly again, but the scratches remained. Thomasina liked it that way. Damage repaired did not have to become damage denied. Peregrine did not propose during those 6 weeks. That was perhaps the clearest sign that he had understood her. He called properly. He wrote sparingly. He invited her to committee discussions, walks, and quiet afternoons where Dorcas or Barnaby remained close enough to satisfy propriety and far enough to pretend they were not listening. He did not ask whether she had forgiven him. He did not turn his apology into a request for comfort. He simply behaved differently. When something touched her life, he told her. When a decision concerned them both, he asked. When silence belonged to her, he left it alone. One afternoon in Hyde Park, with Dorcas walking several paces behind and pretending to be absorbed by a passing carriage, Peregrine said, "You know I would marry you tomorrow." Thomasina kept her eyes ahead. "That sounds dangerously like a proposal. It is an observation, a strategic one. I am a political duke. Strategy is an occupational weakness." She smiled. "And yet you have not asked." "No." Why Peregrine was silent for several steps. "Because I want you to know what your life feels like when you are not choosing between marriage and uncertainty." Thomasina stopped. He stopped beside her. "You thought of that?" "I think of nearly everything concerning you." His expression softened. "I am learning that not every thought gives me the right to decide." The answer moved through her with more force than praise would have. "You have improved," Barnaby says disappointingly slowly. "Barnaby has high standards. He taught me Latin at 12. I have been disappointing him ever since." Thomasina laughed, and Peregrine looked at her as though the sound itself justified 6 weeks of patience. Later that summer, Thomasina accepted an invitation to Merewick Park. Dorcas travelled with her, and Barnaby joined them for part of the journey north, complaining cheerfully that Peregrine's country hospitality had deteriorated since boyhood despite all evidence to the contrary. Merewick Park was old, broad, and dignified, without feeling staged for admiration. Peregrine did not show Thomasina the estate as though offering her a prize. He showed it because it was his home, and because he wanted her to know the place where the title mattered least. Several days after her arrival, they walked toward the small halt on a branch line bordering the estate, a modest platform used by local travelers and estate traffic. Dorcas and Barnaby remained at the house after declaring, with suspicious unanimity, that neither had the strength for another walk. Thomasina suspected arrangement. Peregrine knew she suspected. Neither mentioned it. A wooden bench stood beneath the shelter. Thomasina looked at it. Peregrine looked at her. "Too obvious?" he asked. "A little. I considered a ballroom. I would have left. A chapel, worse, a library?" Thomasina gave him a look, entirely overused. Peregrine nodded gravely. "Then the railway halt survives by elimination." Thomasina sat. This time she did not offer him the bench first. He noticed. Of course he did. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Peregrine said, "Do you remember York?" "I remember being tired." "So do I." "You were not tired." "No. I was disappointed in humanity." "That sounds exhausting." A faint smile touched his face, then faded. "I noticed you because you stood." Thomasina turned toward him. "Not because discomfort made you virtuous. Not because sacrifice made you worthy. I noticed you because every other person in that room had found a reason why one man's fatigue was not their concern, and you refuse convenient lie." She said nothing. Peregrine held her gaze. "But I did not love you because you gave away a seat." Her breath caught despite herself. "I loved you because in time you learned when not to." The words settled somewhere deeper than flattery could have reached. Peregrine drew a slow breath. "I will not promise never to be wrong. You have collected too much evidence against such a claim. A prudent admission. But I will tell you the truth. I will ask before deciding what belongs to both of us. I will stand beside you when you want me there and step back when you do not." He paused. "Thomasina Thorneby, will you marry me?" The silence after the question held York Station, Markham House, the damaged clasp, the false accusation, the locked door, the room at Merewick House, where truth had finally outrun shame, and every morning since in which Thomasina had discovered that freedom did not vanish merely because no one else controlled it. She looked at Peregrine and understood that saying yes would not rescue her. She had already left, already chosen uncertainty, already learned she could stand alone. Now she could choose to sit beside someone without disappearing into him. "Yes," she said. Peregrine did not move. "Yes? You look surprised. I am being careful. Then let me be exact. Yes, Your Grace, I will marry you," he exhaled. "Thank God." Thomasina raised one brow. "Very ducal. Do not use it. Cruel. Efficient." Months later, after proper courtship, settlements, and marriage, Thomasina boarded a northbound train beside her husband. Her reticule rested in her own hand. Inside it was the repaired silver railway ticket case that had belonged to Tobias Thornby, its old scratches still visible. She opened it. 2 railway tickets rested inside. Peregrine glanced toward the available places. Window or aisle? Thomasina closed the case and looked at him. "Whichever I choose." Peregrine smiled. "Exactly." Thomasina took the window seat. Peregrine sat beside her. This time, Thomasina remained seated beside the man who had never asked her to disappear.